Hi, everyone. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Really pleased to be welcoming you to another one of these fabulous mobilization sessions that the Canada Healthy Communities Initiative is producing. Really pleased to see so many coming in from across the country to a new Canada, to the same Canada. I'm not sure, but we woke up and Canada's still here. I gather there are still all sorts of ballots being counted everywhere. I'm one of the people that mailed my ballot in. I want my ballot to count. I know that all of you will have also exercised your franchise yesterday or before, like I did. So we await the final results. But here we are back in a conversation about the importance of placemaking and engagement to make our communities stronger and more vibrant and healthier, and all the things that this program is about. So I'm going to encourage you to put your names into the chat. Let us know when you're coming in from. It's always heartening for us to see. I work for the Canadian Urban Institute. Sorry, I meant to say that. And for us to see with our partners, Community Foundations of Canada, and in this case, 880 Cities, which is hosting this session, where you're coming in from. So whatever exotic clime you are coming in from, let us know. Drop it into the chat. Also to know that the way these Zoom things work is that you can see us and hear us, but we can't actually see or hear you. But you've got this wonderful chat where, and I know that the chat function in Zoom is very well used by people coming on to what we call these mob sessions. So looking forward to hearing, seeing your comments and your questions for Amanda and for Gia in the presentation that you're going to hear. If you've got questions, throughout the session, you can pop them into the chat and they'll sometimes get answered in the chat because we have experts standing by who know the program really well, and they will be able to respond, or Amanda and Gia will be online, be live with you and they can respond to them too. This question is available en deux langues. So if you would like to be listening in French, go down, or English, whichever language you prefer, go down to get interpretation. You go to the globe at the bottom of your screen, click on that globe, and that will switch you between either French or English. So if you want to bone up on the other language, that's what you can do. You can listen in one language, speak in the other, whatever you choose. These sessions are supposed to be as interactive as possible. So I really hope you'll put questions and references and links. We always keep the chat. We make sure that we mine the chat for all the interesting things you put in there. So if you've got resources or ideas, just remember we're creating a community across the country that's committed to placemaking and committed to doing the learning from each other. This is all about what we're building in this process. So for all, please, please, please don't hesitate. Put some stuff up there. If you've got a great reference or great resource that you've been using, or you've got some big pressing question in your head that you hope we're going to get resolved through this whole darn thing, then put it in there because we want to be able to see it. I happen to be in Halifax today. The Canadian Urban Institute is a national thing, and we work around the country. And one of the things that we do is a program called COI Local, where we're present in a community for a week, working with a bunch of partners, and we do all sorts of meetings and events and sessions to really get a sense of what the particular local challenges are and the local opportunities are in a community. And this week, we're in the wonderful regional municipality of Halifax. Yesterday, we were here for the Art of City building, which is a big international conference. I suspect some of you tuned in. And then this week, we're now proceeding through the week to have all sorts of meetings. Halifax is the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq. And that's actually, the Mi'kmaq is the name of Halifax and the Mi'kmaq people. And it's an ancestral and unceded territory of those peoples, covered by something, the particular treaty of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoqiyik signed, and which were actually also the Maliseet peoples. They signed with the British Crown in 1725. Anyone that spent time here, as in Victoria, it's interesting, those two ends of the country where the British influence is still quite present. You can see it in the built form. You can see it in some of the things that are sort of the ways in which some of the stores are organized. I always am sort of reminded here. But these treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact, it recognized the Mi'kmaq and the Wolastoqiyik and recognized their title to the land, and it established kind of the ground rules for what has become an ongoing relationship between these nations. So it's an interesting thing to be immersed in that. We had a session this morning on where how the relationship with Indigenous peoples is evolving here in this region. We've just learned so much. So, and we know that placemaking is essential to the reconciliation agenda that we're all trying to navigate our way into, to understand how we can better honor and respect and affirm the ancestral traditions here and Indigenous communities here in these here in the East, but everywhere where all of you are. And I'm sure some of you are going to be, I can see you are on the chat telling us what the ancestral territory is that you happen to be a guest in. So these sessions, which I said are affectionately called mob sessions by us, mobilization sessions, are really about knowledge sharing, sparking imagination, and building connection between you. So we are fortunate to have many partners working on the Healthy Communities Initiative with us, and 880 Cities has been with us from the beginning, and they are going to lead us in some discussions about some concrete steps and tactics to allow these kinds of initiatives that you're all behind to engage people of all ages and abilities and backgrounds, and through both public space animation and also mobility, which of course is where 880 really has tremendous experience. So we're inviting you to join the discussion, and there'll be some polling, always the fun part. Just remember that polling is helping us identify where the community of practice is evolving across the country. So it's please don't feel scrutinized by that. It's not a heavy duty thing. It's just a way for us to kind of get a pulse on what people's priorities are. And as I suggested, our key partner in the Healthy Communities Initiative is the Community Foundations of Canada. In a second, you're going to hear from Michelle Bridger, who will welcome you. But also part of this session, once Michelle's done and Amanda takes over from 880, we're going to hear from 2 projects that have already been funded through SHIHI, so people can get a sense of the kinds of things. And we're delighted to have Colleen Stinson from the municipality of Grayson. I was going to say the booming metropolis of Grayson in Saskatchewan, and Clara Stewart Robinson, who's from the Jane Finch Community Centre in Toronto. So we'll get something from the prairies and something from Ontario and Central Canada to hear their examples. And you're going to hear a bit how they've been bridging things in terms of urban rural. What can we learn from each other in that way? Municipality versus not-for-profit or community group. These are all interesting things that sort of inform all the different ways that we can do this kind of work. There's no real one size, one approach, as you know. That's a wonderful thing. So we appreciate that the government of Canada provided support for us to try these things, for you to try these things and pilot these things, because lots of different approaches is what we need for us to really learn. So if I could just pass to Michelle Bridger from Communities Foundations of Canada, our great partner on this project, and then she's going to come back to me. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, Mary. Thanks so much. I just wanted to wish a quick and warm welcome to everyone. Just so happy to join this session. This has been, a pretty long journey to get us here. We're just really happy to have the opportunity to attend this session, to hear from some funded projects so they can share their stories. It's just really important that we can continue to support organizations with more than just funding to really be able to grow and support organizations. So yeah, overall, just keen to hear from you and to share some experiences and learn together. Thanks so much, Mary.
Great. And I should just say too that as we said, we're learning about not only how placemaking works and how your various communities are trying different stuff, but also we want to learn about this program itself, how we've been running it, how we've been able to create a process where people can actually apply and that stuff. So feel free to give us feedback on that, because you just never know. Hopefully the program will continue to live on. We hope so, and touch wood. And we'd like to be able to continue to get better and better at it. So any feedback you've got for us, please let us know, and welcome everybody. And now I'm going to pass to the able leadership of Amanda and Gia. So over to you at 880 Cities. Thanks for joining us, everybody. And I'm looking forward to the session. Over to you, Amanda.
Thanks so much, Mary and Michelle, for that wonderful warm welcome. And thank you to CUI and CFC for their leadership on this funding initiative. We're so excited to talk to you all today about building community engagement. As Mary said, my name's Amanda O'Rourke. I am the Executive Director of 880 Cities. Today I'm calling in from Toronto, the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. The land on which I reside today is the site of broken treaties and covenants, and we believe it's our job as stewards to learn our position, both geographically and in terms of our personal identities. I am a settler and I am learning. So I'll be kicking things off today and moderating through the next hour with you all. My colleague, Gia Benny, who's a project manager at 880 Cities, is going to be sharing some practical tips on building community engagement based on our experience in this work. In addition to myself and Gia, as Mary mentioned, we have Colleen and Clara to talk about their Canadian Healthy Communities projects and how they're doing engagement. So overall, a really packed agenda. So let's get to it. Actually, the first thing I have is a poll question. So we can get to know you all a bit more. The first question is really easy. What sector are you working in? So feel free to answer the poll question. Jamie, thank you. So timely, who's behind the scenes doing this work. If you can answer the poll, and then we'll share results in a few minutes. Looks like we're getting the results. There we go. Most folks are joining from nonprofit sector. Wonderful. And public sector as well. So thanks for doing the first poll question. You all did amazing. There'll be a few sprinkled throughout to build a bit of interactivity and engagement in this approach as well. If you are not familiar with 880 Cities, we are a nonprofit, as many of you all joining here are today as well. We are based in Toronto, but we do work internationally. And our mission is really to improve the quality of life for people living in cities, no matter their age, ability, or socioeconomic status. And we do this by bringing people together to improve our streets, our parks, and public spaces, because we believe these are really essential to creating healthier and more equitable and resilient cities. And over the last 15 years, we've been working with a lot of different cities in many different contexts and challenging the status quo on how many cities design, plan, and manage their streets and public spaces. And we do that by first asking a really simple, but we think powerful question. What if everything we did in our cities was great for an 8-year-old and an 8-year-old? We believe if you start there, you can create better cities for everyone. And the 880 lens is always our starting point, but not our end point. We really know the important role that social identities such as gender, race, ability, sexual orientation, gender expression, ethnic and cultural background, and economic status play in a person's experience navigating public space. We know, I can go to the next slide, that place matters for health outcomes. I don't have to tell this group, you all are doing your projects focused on improving health outcomes and focused on creating healthy communities. We know that where we live, our access to green space, recreation, social connection, active transportation are all impacting our health and our well-being. And we also know that the pandemic has certainly highlighted and exacerbated those inequities in access to public space and good places. So we're really, as Mary mentioned, we're very excited to hear from you as well about your experience on working in this healthy communities work and engaging communities. So feel free to join the chat, share your experiences. So we know that parks, streets, and public spaces have a very important role to play in terms of building those healthier communities, in transforming those exclusive places into more inclusive places that center human beings at the center of all that we do, and their everyday dignity, their health, and their sense of belonging in public space. And ultimately, our work at 880 is about reclaiming the right to the city for all, especially for those who have been disproportionately impacted by car-centric planning and a disinvestment in public space. And that includes children, older adults, racialized communities, and low-income communities. So that's enough about 880, but today we are really talking about community engagement, which is really actually at the heart of what we do at 880 Cities. I mentioned at the outset when in terms of achieving our mission, what we do is bring people together to improve parks and streets and public spaces. And that bring people together piece is so central to how we're able to achieve our mission. And there are a lot of definitions of community engagement. And I'm just going to do a little bit of framing, and then I am going to pass it over to Gia, who's going to actually talk about some practical tips and examples from projects we've worked on. But there's a lot of definitions around community engagement, and all of them kind of center around this idea of a process of collaboration with community. But the definition that I actually really love the most is this one put forward by Jay Pitter. Jay Pitter, who's an author, placemaker, who is really leading the equity work on this funding initiative. I just love how Jay makes this very tangible. I really love this definition. I think she really hits the nail on the head for anyone who's been doing this kind of work. I think it really gets to the point of what this is all about. She writes that the act of equitable placemaking is a radical act of collaboration and an ongoing process of knowing when to lead, cede space, listen deeply, and ask courageous questions. So thank you, Jay, for that wonderful definition, because I think that really actually reflects a lot of what many people probably on this call, how they experience engagement and collaboration. I like to put it into really simple terms. I like to think about engagement as really creating the conditions for building relationships. I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important. It's creating the conditions for building relationships. I encourage you to adapt the mindset of the gardener. As a failed gardener and getting better, I know that good gardening is really about building that really healthy soil, building the foundation so that things really grow. So adopt that mindset of the gardener and think about creating those conditions for building thriving, good relationships. And as I mentioned, Gia is going to share some practical tips. But I also wanted to say, as Jay reminds us, it's also really important to understand how those conditions are not just a one-size-fits-all approach, which actually Mary alluded to as well. It needs to be different depending on who you are engaging with. And then one other, this is my last slide, and then I'm going to pass it over to Gia. I also really want to quickly explain that it's important to know the difference between outreach, engagement, and organizing. These are very different tools and all very important, but distinct, and can be mutually reinforcing for successful collaboration with community. And as you can see, engagement is kind of the glue that bridges outreach and organizing. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Gia and invite her to come in.
Thank you, Amanda. So the traditional consultation tends to look a lot more like this, and that's because cities have structured, sorry, one second. So I'm going to go over what we call the 880 cities rules of engagement. And for that, why we have those rules is because the traditional consultation, it tends to look a lot like this. And that's because cities have structured their traditional consultations in such a way that favors segments of communities that tend to be able-bodied, middle-aged, affluent, and not all that diverse. If these are the voices our elected officials and city staff are hearing over everyone else, then we will get a city that reflects their needs, and we won't get an age-friendly city. And it's not surprising that if we don't hear from lower income residents, then we end up with public transit systems that look like this. And if we don't hear from senior citizens or people with people in mobility devices, then we are going to get intersections that look like this. Now, this might look great from an architect's design, but it is devoid of life or humanity. If we want streets that look like this and public spaces that look like this, then we need to change how our community engagement looks like. We need to move away from 7 p.m. town halls where the same 15 people come out and say the same things over and over again. And we need to work to get engagement that actually looks a lot like this. That's where the 880 cities rules of engagement come in. They aren't going to make engagement look like this. Not everyone is going to be looking all happy and smiling, but they will go a long way in getting us closer to it. And these are the rules of engagement. Rule 1, take it to the streets. The very first, most fundamental rule is to take it to the streets. One of the main reasons why traditional consultations are so exclusive is because very few people have the time, mobility options, the financial freedom, and the ability to come to City Hall to participate in engagement. So our rule follows the advice of the Little Mermaid, and we want to go where the people are. That means taking conversations out of stuffy consultation rooms and into busy street corners, bus stops, transit stations. And going to a bus stop is a great way to reach people who are normally not represented in traditional consultations. When we meet community where they are at, we are creating a safer, lower barrier way to participate. We are meeting people in places that they feel most comfortable in. The community are the experts in how their community functions, and it is our job to meet them where they are. Taking it to the streets also means piggybacking on festivals, events, community celebrations at all times of the day and all times of the year. Wherever people go as part of their everyday lives, that's where we need to be. For your engagements, that might mean talking to people on the actual street or park or even some event that is taking place. All this might seem really obvious, but a lot of time this doesn't actually happen. This is from our 880 Streets program, where we close the street in front of a school to cars, but open it up to children and parents to play and feel safe before school. And we asked really simple questions here, like which one do you prefer and how do you feel? And we did this to collect data on how the 880 Streets performed and to empower kids with a voice. But and we have to know that children can provide a wealth of information. And when we engage with the youth, we also get an opportunity to engage with their parents. Taking it to the streets isn't just about where we hold our engagement, but it is also when. You will engage different populations at 6 a.m. as opposed to, say, 11 or 12. Sometimes taking it to the streets also means taking it indoors if that's where a local community meets. Setting up shop in malls in the early morning is often a great time to connect with seniors as they do their walking routes. In one of our projects, we worked with the local YWCA to connect with youth as part of their programming because they didn't have many places to hang out outside. Rule number 2 is be inclusive. Inclusion isn't just about making sure you're talking to people of all abilities and backgrounds. It's about creating opportunity for everyone to have a say if they want to. Most town halls require people to get in front of a microphone to have their voice heard. If you're very young, if you have a speech impediment, if your English is not your first language, this can be so intimidating and can shut you out of the process. Using boards like these where they can write their ideas is a very simple and low-cost way of making engagement accessible. Dots, sticky notes, markers, anything simple and easy to use can make it a low-barrier activity. Also, ensure that your materials are translated when required. Being inclusive also, of course, means recognizing what privilege and blind spots you're bringing into your project. We were working on an engagement project in Macon, Georgia, around mobility, but we recognized that there were people in the community who weren't going to trust the city or an outsider like us to talk about issues. So we hired Zikil, a young man from that community, who had started a project recording the stories of community elders who had lived in the neighborhood. And we hired him and his team to be the one to go door to door because we knew they knew him and trusted him. For your projects, you might have to find your communities, Zikil, bring him on your team and compensate for his local expertise. And then on a different project in the US, we wanted to reach out to the local Latinx population, but many of them were undocumented and wouldn't have appreciated people coming door to door. So we set up in a Latinx grocery store and worked with a partner who spoke Spanish. We weren't as successful as we wanted to be, but in this case, we weren't in town for long enough to establish relationships and create new plans. But this one event, it highlighted for the local team how much more work they had to do in building these partnerships with the Latinx community. Rule number 3 is play with a purpose. We need to put the engaging back in engagement. Adding something playful for kids will allow you to chat with the parents while the kids played. In one of our projects, we used really simple cornhole and golf games. And this allowed us to chat with the kids, with the parents when the kids played. And it doesn't have to be something big and flashy though, like a small art project for kids to get a flower in a tin can so they can decorate it can create lasting memories. And trust me, even adults like these sort of things. Rule 4 is value people's time. If people are engaging with you, they are donating the most valuable gift they have, that is their time. And they should have something in return for this. Something like this is a great way to do that, like a community outdoor movie night. It's a great way to give something back to the people who donated their time. And it is a great way to connect with the communities who might not feel comfortable or safe going to City Hall to raise their voice. And this way you can speak with them informally in a place that they do feel a sense of ownership over. And it needn't be a grand movie night. It could be, a simple donut or a coffee as well. Give a little something back to people so that when at the right time, they will be there for you when you need support for implementation. Rule 5 is create some buzz. Now, this is how community engagement notices are usually look like, but who is ever going to read this or who is ever going to be excited by this? Cities and organizations need to up their game and actually make engagement look attractive and interesting. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can work with graphic design students or even use softwares like Canva. This might mean more work at the front of projects, but saving a ton of work at the end because communities will be supportive and the final product will be much better. Last rule I have for you is rule 6, take action. At some point in the engagement process, you need to begin taking action and translating people's ideas and feedback into tangible change that people can touch, taste, feel, experience, and see. Are there some quick wins you can implement to reflect the community's feedback? It is really important to emphasize that testing things out need not be a big production. It doesn't need to have millions of dollars or infrastructure behind it. It can be as simple as taking something you're already doing and bringing it outside. Now, this is a project we worked on in a small town called Whitby, where they had a public square that was almost always empty all times of the year. We worked with the town's recreation department to start bringing some of the classes they normally do outside to the square. It took about an extra $75 to move the sound equipment for this class, and they did this for 7 weeks. By the end of 7 weeks, the local community started asking the city for permission to program the square. So for $75, the town tested out something simple and jump-started community conversations on what to do with an underutilized public space. This goes on to show that placemaking, if done in itself, is a form of engagement. So that's great. We have all these rules. But what do you do during a pandemic like this? In our practice, we've been doing a lot of engagement online. And here the rule of take it to streets take a whole different meaning. It's a good exercise to first determine what priority groups you want to engage and then find out how to engage them and how to reach them. Maybe you want to engage the kids in a neighborhood. You could first engage with the school in the neighborhood and see if they can connect you to the students studying there, and then bring them together for an online workshop and use tools like Jamboard or Miro. This picture is from a workshop we did with school students in Bronte in Oakville, Ontario, and we used Jamboard for this exercise. Also, remember, if you want to engage groups that don't speak the language you speak, make sure to include an interpreter in your workshops. But not everyone has the privilege of being home to attend online workshops, so we need other strategies to include them. The first image that you see on the screen is a bus shelter ad asking people their opinion on the future of their community. This makes it easier to reach folks who use public transport during the pandemic. The second image is a sidewalk decal on streets where the Quiet Streets pilot was implemented in Toronto. And with this, you can target or you can reach people who walk and people who cycle in the city. Again, if you want to engage groups that don't speak the language you speak, make sure to translate your survey materials. And lastly, if your location doesn't have good internet connectivity or you need to access groups that don't use the internet much, there is always the good old telephone. In one of our projects with seniors, we just spoke to dozens of seniors on the phone. And also, if rules in your area allow, you could also do masked, physically distant events like intercept surveys, walk audits, and so on. So that's a few ideas for you on how to do engagement during the pandemic. And of course, remember to adapt those rules to the pandemic in any way that you can. And that's it from me. So with that, I hand it back to Amanda.
Thanks, Gia. Some great practical tips there. We actually have another poll question for you all. And thanks everyone for contributing to the chat. Like to see all the interaction happening. But our question for you all is, how do you stay in touch with your local community for your projects and initiatives? And Jamie's gonna post that question so that you can respond to the poll. We've got a few options here. Kind of wishing we had poll music. But we'll wait for everyone to respond, and Jamie's going to post the results in a 30 seconds probably or so. Thanks, Kay, for seconding my poll music idea. Ooh, social media is definitely the top choice there. Really, a lot of diversity though, in terms of a lot of the things that Gia was talking about. Word of mouth, good old fashioned posters and flyers, newsletters, great, fantastic. Okay. The next poll question, now that we're on a roll, is how has COVID-19 affected the community relationships and bonds? So again, we tried to put these into multiple choice answers. If there is an answer that doesn't relate to what exactly your experience has been, feel free to add into the chat. But as Gia mentioned, COVID has really forced us and many to think about how to do engagement in a pandemic. So how has it affected you? And again, feel free to add additional details in the chat if these answers aren't exactly reflective of your experience. Someone mentioned weak bonds became weaker, strong bonds remain strong. That's great. Thanks, Stephanie. Can I hum? I don't think I'm going to hum this time. Question 3. Okay, great. Here's the results. Thank you, Jamie. So it looks like the answer is basically that the ways in which community engages have changed. Some have suffered, maybe some are stronger, not as much stronger. So certainly the pandemic has even reinforced the need to have targeted approaches to engagement, as Gia mentioned. So at this time, thank you very much, everyone. You guys rocked the polls. Like to see the answers. You can stop sharing the screen, Gia, because we are going to invite our two kind of panelists, our community project panel members to turn on their cameras. And I'd like to invite Colleen and Clara to say hello, give a quick wave, and I'm going to just briefly introduce them, and then I have a few questions for them. But again, as everyone, we'd love to hear your experience. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have folks monitoring that. Oh, Colleen Stinson is from the municipality of Grayson in Saskatchewan, as Mary mentioned at the top. Her project is building accessible walking paths in Grayson's Heritage Park to address increased demand for accessible recreational space amidst COVID. Welcome, Colleen, thanks for joining. And then we also have Clara Stewart-Robertson from the Jane Finch Community Centre in Toronto. Her project is Corner Commons. It is about creating important gathering space for community, honoring history and responding to the needs of a diversity of residents in the community. So welcome, Clara. So I actually have my first question is for both of you, but I'll ask Colleen to answer first and then Clara. I know that you both are doing projects in two very different communities and contexts. Tell us a bit about your project and what community engagement looks like for your project. You're muted, Colleen. Please unmute. You're still unmuted. I think it double clicked.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay. So I work and live in a very small community, a rural community. We're in Saskatchewan, southeast Saskatchewan. Grayson is just a village. It's the Village of Grayson. We are a municipality. The population here is about 211 people. We serve a larger area of about 600 people in the region, and then even further than that towards the Capel Valley. We have a number of resort communities, Indigenous communities, and also obviously a lot of agricultural RMs, rural, we call them rural municipalities here. So we serve a larger region, and there is some tourism, et cetera. But one of the things that our project to build accessible walking paths in Grayson's Heritage Park really started, we've been thinking about it for quite a long time, but it became very apparent after COVID-19 that people had very limited access to recreational spaces in our community. So the main goal for our project, in collaboration with, I guess I should explain a little bit, with the Grayson Parks and Rec Board, which operates underneath the municipality, and a local community committee called Grayson in Bloom, which we are trying to beautify the community. So we work with those partners in trying to develop this project. But it was in response to what was going on with COVID-19. Even though it had been discussed before, it became very apparent that it was more and more important that we do this. To have created walking space, accessible walking space. We want to increase our mobility, allow our underserved people to be able to use the park, so people with mobility issues, seniors, as well as people living with disabilities in our area. We have a hospice right in the community, and we also have a seniors home here within our population. So we want to reach out to those people. And then we have a number of children too who also are living with disabilities that are in our community. So that's the main reason why we decided to do this project. Community engagement here is a little bit different probably than in the urban areas. We do a lot by word of mouth in the past, but however, we've had to change that too with COVID-19 and increase our social media presence, reach out more in terms of announcements, that sort of thing through social media. We usually always met like as community groups. We have our Parks and Rec Board has actually about 20 small community groups, even though we're a small community. So we run this project a lot with volunteers. So we rely on our community volunteers to do that, even though it's being led through the municipality. So we rely on them. So that's one of the things that in terms of engaging, we do a traditional, like just exact like what you said in your poll, like we do social media, we do the traditional word of mouth. We rely a lot on our relationships in the community, like they're long-standing relationships. We work quite well with our different partners, even with the RM, for example, or other municipality, which actually is within our community too, even though their mandate is larger than ours. So we rely on our community partners and our community volunteers and to do the work that we need to do to build those relationships. In COVID-19, the word of mouth is still important. We do more by telephone though. Telephone, social media, posters, that sort of things, community newsletters, and that's been something that's been important. So for example, we usually put out, the village puts out a community newsletter, but this year we actually tried to make it more attractive, as you guys were mentioning at 880 Cities, and that seemed to get a more response. We put this out before in a long time, like every year we put out different newsletters, but it didn't get the feedback that we got this year because it was more vibrant and colorful, that kind of thing. So it does make a difference, I can say that. And because some of the seniors aren't on social media, we do still rely a bit on that print media as well to get some of that word out there. So
excellent. Thanks, Colleen.
I'm not sure what else I can tell you about the project. So
to be more specific, though, we're constructing about 800 feet of accessible walking paths. We're just a small park, and we've been trying to improve the accessibility of the park. And so people will be able to access like the playground and that sort of thing, that if there are children that are living with disabilities, that they can actually get to the playground, and some of the features there as well, and park benches, etc. So
that's great. Those are all excellent insights and around how you're doing engagement. I want to ask Clara to come in here as well and share her experience with her project on doing engagement. Is anything that Colleen's saying resonating with your experience?
Yeah, for sure. Even though we're a very different context, I think similar experiences with engagement. I'm based in the Jane Finch neighborhood, which is in Northwest Toronto, and been working there for about 10 years. We've been working on Corner Commons, though, for the last 2+ years to try to transform kind of like a corner in the heart of the neighborhood. It's at the main intersection, involving kind of the sidewalk and a privately owned parking lot into kind of a new, accessible, and inclusive gathering space and public space for community members, where we can run programs and events, and just like relax and hang out there anytime. So our team, the Green Change team at the center, has been coordinating this project, but we're supported by a local architecture and design firm called Perkins & Will, and then a larger community working group of resident leaders and grassroots groups and community organizations, and other supporters who are really steering this project with us through the implementation. And I think, Amanda, you mentioned like our parking lot has been such an informal gathering space over the years for Jane Finch residents, and it's been a rallying point for people. It's been host to community events and press conferences and big advocacy campaigns. And we really wanted to honor and respect those uses through our project and give amenities and programming to really enhance how that could be used by the broader community. And so this year, thanks to Healthy Communities and thanks to redesigning completely for COVID context, we were able to build Corner Commons in June and July with 25+ residents and mainly youth from the neighborhood, and create kind of a space with a stage and 3 large shade structures, 30+ lounge and block seats, and 30 planters surrounding the site with all native plants and flowers, and kind of do a colorful design on the asphalt ground to really like guide people through the space and create some kind of wayfinding and safety with COVID restrictions. So that has been realized. We've been up and running, and we'll be open until the end of this month, and sadly have to come down, and then hopefully we'll be back next spring. But for us, engagement has been happening through the actual installation of our project, but leading up to it, we had initial community design workshops with residents and community leaders about 2 years ago in 2019 to really set kind of the vision and programming ideas for this space. We had a week-long pop-up that year to test out different programming and have it led by the community and local groups. And then we kind of were going through the design process and constantly checking in with people and using our community working group as that touch point to tell us, like, are we on the right track? Are we designing things that are functional? Will the space be used and how will it be used? And looking at all of our funding and other logistic considerations. And then through COVID, we've had to rely on social media to continue those conversations of like, what colors should we use? What is the look and feel of the space that the residents want to see? So we've been doing that. And when we had to cancel last year due to COVID, we still were able to do an artist residency program where we had Jane Finch artists come in and do installations on site, kind of multimedia installations, both online and in person, to really show how the space could be used and how we're kind of like growing into that corner as a community to create kind of a welcoming public space. So our engagement has been pretty varied through in-person and online, and spreading the word through existing initiatives and grassroots groups and community leaders. because we really wanted to like build on what's already happening in the neighborhood. And it's also part of a larger conversation about how Jane Finch is changing and gentrifying, because the site where we're located is going to be redeveloped in the near future. So there's a lot of ongoing conversations that we've been tapping into to make sure that Corner Commons has that context and broader engagement in the neighborhood.
I love that both you and Colleen hit on a lot of like key themes that are shared. So one is I'm really hearing like the ongoing piece. I think we're over this idea of like of an engagement phase of a project. Engagement is like ongoing, it's always happening. I also really love how both of you talked a lot about flexibility in your approach, like, you know, iterating, creating those feedback opportunities from a diversity of places and using different techniques. And I think that you both really are demonstrating that key principle that I think is so important is like those conditions for building relationships. I heard relationships a lot from both of you. So I know that from my experience in doing engagement, there's always like, you know, you have this conception of a project, and then you get out into the community and you hear lots of different ideas, and sometimes like things change. And I always find that that's an interesting piece to sort of dive into. What have you learned from your community over the course of, I know the project is in initial phases, sometimes building off of existing ones. What are the key things that you've learned from community that you didn't know when you first kind of conceived of the project? Any key insights that you'd like to share? Colleen, I'll hand it over to you.
I think one thing I've learned is like, although we have had, like we do work closely with the Grayson Parks and Rec Board and Grayson and Bloom, and we do have regular contact and communication. I think that you can miss certain things. So it's always going back to trying to get the feedback from people who are going to use the park, right? The end users, that sort of thing, to make sure, for example, that it is, yeah, that's right, that it's going to be functional, that the design is functional and it's going to work. Whether or not the materials that we had set out to do are the appropriate materials, that kind of thing. So we've had to adapt a little bit in the design too. I mean, we are limited. We have a small space here. I mean, it's an important piece of green space in our community, but it is small. So we have a limited number of areas that we can create our walking paths, for example. But it's still very important because we do use the park for a lot of community functions. It's that sort of thing throughout the year. So I think that in terms of that is the timelines, be realistic. Also about volunteer times, like one of the things that challenges probably we face, maybe not dissimilar to other communities, but is, you know, just that we have limited number of volunteers. And so volunteer time is really important, but they also have competing responsibilities. So timelines have to be realistic. I think that was one of the big things, listening to feedbacks and definitely, you know, learning to be more, I guess, clear about the project objectives and that sort of thing right from the beginning, all the way through, that sort of thing. So that's the ongoing feedback that I think in terms of how we're shaping our projects. Like we do get together and discuss it, and it's been on the back burner for a long time, but still, like you can miss some things if you don't check in with people on a regular basis, that sort of thing. So that's one of the things about the community engagement is so important. But
those are excellent points and good advice for folks attending. Clara?
Yeah, I think for us, because since we've been up and running since June, like every day is a learning experience for us, and we're constantly tweaking the space and adapting to how people are using it. And I know Ernestine Sunskal, who's been leading this project for our team, and we're in 100% construction mode all the time, I think, responding to see how people are using the space. And that's its own process. But on a really big level, something that I've taken away this summer from seeing Corner Commons come to life is like the variety of ways that people are using and taking ownership of the space, which I think kind of really challenges how we've thought about public space in the neighborhood in the past, because we've done a lot of park engagement and public space work in the neighborhood over the years, and have seen and heard about all the different barriers to accessing and using spaces, which are all very real, especially safety concerns and concerns of like over surveillance and policing in the spaces. But to see like what happens when you build a space at a really central location where people already are, you make it bright and joyful, you put the amenities in, and trust that people will use them, and they are what people have asked for and need, that you see how people really take on that space and use it in any way they want, from like taking phone calls to eating food after going to buy groceries, and doing photo shoots and recording podcasts. Like there's such a variety of uses that we've seen in this space, which is amazing. And to know that because it was designed and built and really guided by the community, you can kind of overcome some of those barriers to public space access, and people respond to that. The other thing that we're learning, especially over the last month, is mental health and well-being have been huge priorities in Jane Finch for many decades, and the lack of supports in the neighborhood has been really challenging. And we're seeing that in a very present way in Corner Commons this summer. And we're learning how to think more about like what's a community-led approach to responding to people in crisis, to supporting people going through mental health challenges, and how to create design features and also programming that's super supportive for people in those moments, and to not rely on security and policing, which has historically been the response in our neighborhood and public space. And that's a new learning experience for us to figure out what that looks like in a space that's kind of operated by the community instead of by the city or by a private organization. So we're still figuring out how to adapt and respond.
Excellent, excellent insights there, Clara. I love that it seems like as Corner Commons evolves, it's because you all are facilitating this space where people can sort of put their own fingertips and ideas in. It's becoming, you're kind of acting as a facilitator for actually these ideas beyond what you have conceived, which is great. Like the community is kind of taking more stewardship and ownership of the space. So great insights. And then around mental health, certainly in terms of the conversation around managing public space and how our public spaces can embody our principles around equity and inclusion. Those are really great points to highlight, and I think a process that everyone is learning more about. I have one more question for you all, but I also wanted, before I ask that third question, I did want to invite folks who are joining to please, if you have any questions for Clara, Pauline, myself, or Gia, or anyone from who is on the screen, please enter them into the chat and we'll make sure to try to address them directly. So I'm going to ask my question, but if anyone has questions for Clara, Colleen, or Gia, please put them in the chat. Colleen, you kind of actually alluded to this a little bit in your last response, but it's around advice for audience members or participants who may be actually even starting to build engagement strategies for their projects, how to create meaningful engagement opportunities, especially for underserved and underrepresented groups. Kind of talked a little bit about that in terms of learning along the way and digging in deeper. Do you have any other advice to share?
I think probably it might be more towards municipalities, I suppose, trying to do some of this kind of work. So it's a little bit different for us, because we're juggling the kind of engagement with all the other administrative duties with a municipality. And in small communities too, especially small rural communities in Saskatchewan anyways, that we wear many hats. But I think that I think that you have to put community engagement in the forefront, and I'm learning that more and more. So even though I've been involved with community projects as a volunteer too for many years, it's still a reminder that we still need to reach out to people. And we've had to adapt quite a bit with the COVID-19 too, to how to find ways that we can still include some recreational activities, right? because we have limited number of facilities, and most of our facilities have been closed with COVID-19, right? So the park was one place where people could go and congregate and have some leisure time and enjoy the walking, walking, that sort of thing. So that's partially, but I think that in terms of what lessons learned is, I guess, is the adapting our strategies to communicate with people, with our communities, and underserved too. So reaching, because for us, I think that it's not just about putting information out there and responding. Sometimes we really have to reach out to those underserved people. And that's one of the things that I have learned over the years of working in a smaller community too, is that you can't always expect people are just going to show up. You need to kind of reach out to them. And that's where the building the relationships is so important. I'm not really sure if it's getting to exactly what you want, but in terms of what I've learned and continue to learn, because it surprises you sometimes, is, we really need to listen and not take it personally, for sure, when they don't like your ideas or whatever, but learn from that feedback and try to find newer ways to integrate that into newer visions or adapt the vision of whatever you're doing or what your project is, right? To be able to be flexible enough to do that. So
I thought that was an excellent answer, and actually really harkens back to that definition at the outset of, like, knowing when to lead, when to cede space, when to really listen and engage in those courageous conversations. So Clara, I'm gonna throw that question to you, and then after you, I'm gonna throw it back to my colleagues at CFC and CUI. But go ahead, Clara, what's your lessons learned or advice for folks listening?
Yeah, I know we don't have a lot of time, but there are a few kind of tips that we embed in our work and also kind of advocate to city staff and consultants and developers to use when they're undertaking a new project and looking at engagement strategies, which is to really make sure you're starting with taking the time to understand the community's context and its history, to get to know the community's priorities, who's already working in that space, and how you can strengthen what's already happening in the area through your project. And I think with Corner Commons, there was an existing life to that intersection and to the parking lot and to the neighborhood as a whole. And that's what makes Corner Commons as it is. And so to build on that, instead of saying we're starting with a blank slate and creating a public space that you can envision from scratch, not that we didn't do broad visioning, but like to say that we're building from how people have used it in the past. The other piece is really to make sure you're engaging local residents and community members in designing your engagement activities and strategies, and that you're building in a mechanism for the community to have accountability and oversight on the process. So for us, that was our advisory group. In other projects that looks differently, but making sure that you have a touch point and checkpoint for people to give you feedback and tell you when something's working or not, or that the best way to reach seniors or youth or a particular cultural community or a faith-based group is this. That is really critical, like for us in our work. And I think the last one is to, I think we've talked about this already, but to really think about engagement as this long-term process beyond the design phase, beyond the startup phase when your project gets off the ground and is built. But know and think about your next steps and what the tangible outcomes will be in the short term and long term, and to be transparent and openly communicate what those are to the broader neighborhood, because that builds trust in your project and in future engagement when people see that there is a long-term plan, even if you may not know exactly what that looks like, but to know that you're investing in the community and there's a value in them investing in your engagement activities. So that's really big for us, and tangibly at Corner Commons when we were building and on site every day for a month working with volunteers, that was like the best form of engagement, to be super visible and to show that that process was unfolding and people could ask us questions at any point. And it challenged us to figure out how to explain what we were doing in a really clear way, and just gave evidence to all of the work for 2 years we had done. So that has been really critical for us.
Those are excellent pieces of advice around accountability, touch points. I'm realizing that we're right at the 2 o'clock mark, at least on Eastern Standard Time. I wanted to, is it Rupal and Gay that are going to join to jump in now? I just want to check that it's time for a wrap up. Want to do my good job of moderating here and making sure we're staying on time.
There. Okay. I don't know if we want to just quickly take that question from John, for anyone that can stay around for a moment. If you see it there in the chat, it's one of those difficult conversations, I think, that you were talking about, Amanda, and maybe there's some advice, some more advice any of you could offer him. Would you like me to read the question?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. We have a project that involves a public space that is usually used by marginalized population at the exclusion of other community residents. And we're trying to open the area up, and we want to be sensitive to everyone, the underserved community, but it could possibly result in gentrification that excludes the marginalized group. This sounds like a really difficult question for me, because I don't think anybody would want to exclude anybody. So how to handle that is the question John is asking.
Yeah, Clara or Colleen, would you like to address John's question? He has down below just another comment. I can see it now. I do not mean to exclude because we're engaging, but the result will likely mean the space is not so attractive for the underserved group, and they feel like they will have to be moved on. So Clara, I think this kind of connects to what you were talking about around understanding the context in the community, and what the doing that work ahead of time, instead of thinking of it as a blank slate of we're going to make this space like, you know, this a concept of a space that is not maybe serving the underserved group, or maybe unintentionally actually pushing people out that you were intending to serve at the beginning. Wonder if you kind of highlighted a little bit of that with the work at Corner Commons, and I know that that's a rapidly changing community as well.
Yeah, it's such a challenging question. I think for us, when we've been looking at a lot of projects in the neighborhood lately, is to really question, like, who are we doing the projects for, and who are the current users, who are the current residents, who's most at risk of being displaced and pushed out by a project and from a space. And those are the people that we need to actively engage and build a project from, instead of sometimes thinking that we can do something for everyone. Hopefully it becomes a space where everyone feels welcome. But if we push out those who are currently using a space and experiencing it in a particular way with something new, then that's adding to the trauma and harm and the history of projects and work that's happened in the neighborhood already, which we're trying to not replicate. So I don't have a clear answer to that, but that's kind of like, we have to do some priority setting for sure in our work. And there are very difficult conversations, especially that we have with the owners of our main space, which is a private parking lot. They're planning their own redevelopment and have different concepts of who current and future users might be. And we have to kind of challenge them often on how we make an inclusive space for those people who have already felt excluded right now, and really open it up for the community who has an attachment to the space, who wants to be a user of it. Those are the people that we have to kind of talk to. So I hope that
Thanks, Clara.
answers a little bit, but happy to talk offline about that.
No, I think that's really good. I would also just add, and I know Gay, we're over time. I'm just going to add two thoughts to John's question. One is related to thinking about public space as not just as its own, we have to remember that public space is part of a whole ecosystem and system. It cannot be thought of in isolation. So I think there's really important aspects around thinking around equitable development and healthy communities work within that larger frame of thinking of how this connects to development in the area, and who gets to Clara's point, who gets to make those decisions and what that accountability system looks like in terms of are we providing those leadership opportunities for members in the community that may have the most to lose potentially with some of these investments and understanding that. And then it also makes me think of a really great phrase from one of my colleagues from one of my global colleagues in the African context. They have this really great phrase that is nothing for us without us. And I think that's just such an important mantra when we think about engagement. So really thinking about, how do we actually center those the folks in the process at the outset to make sure that our process is really actually achieving the outcomes that we want it to do around equity and inclusion. Okay, I know that we're a little over time. Thanks for indulging us, and I thank John for the questions. So I'll pass it over to you to do our wrap up. And thanks, Colleen and Clara, for your fantastic contributions.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Colleen and Claire. I'm going to invite Gabriella to turn on her camera so you can see her, the two of us. We're so grateful for this session, and thank you so much, everyone, for staying for those few extra minutes. That was such an important and very difficult question. I'm glad, and I appreciate everyone having a chance to answer it. Go turn it to you, Gabriella.
Thank you, and we're just finished here. I think it was a magnificent experience. I just want to reiterate the message that Mary gave at the beginning. Our purpose here is to create a space that is held by all of us, and that where we can learn from practitioners and dedicated to practitioners. So please feel free to reach out to us. We are here to listen and to co-create with all of you. You can find out, I think Rupert already shared on the chat, you can reach out to us using the email account healthycommunities@canurb.org. And we will be very happy to receive any suggestions, ideas, brainstorming, anything that comes up to your mind in terms of the future mobilization sessions that we can host together. So thank you very much, everyone. And I think we can leave it here. I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon. Keep posted, make sure that you're on the mailing list, and see you soon, hopefully.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.